For decades, a ruthless serial killer haunted the streets of Chicago, leaving a trail of fear and unanswered questions. Who was this forgotten monster? And could new evidence finally unmask them? In this deep dive, we will explore the horrifying details, the victims, the investigative missteps, and the chilling theories that surround this case. Was this the work of a lone predator, or could there have been more than one killer hiding in the shadows? Let's unravel the mystery. The night Chicago held its breath. The year was 1977, and Chicago was already no stranger to crime. But this was different. A young woman named Lisa Hartley was found brutally murdered in an alley behind a quiet residential block. Her body bore signs of torture, and her cause of death suggested she had suffered greatly. The brutality shocked even the most hardened detectives. What made this case stand out was the complete lack of evidence. No fingerprints, no weapon, no witnesses. It was as if the killer had vanished into thin air. But Lisa wouldn't be the last victim. Just a month later, another one was found, murdered in a strikingly similar fashion. Then another. The city was gripped by fear, and the police realized they weren't just dealing with a murder spree. They had a serial killer on their hands. The victim profile. Patterns began to emerge as detectives studied the victims. All were young women between the ages of 20 and 35, living alone or returning home late at night. Some were students, others working professionals, but none had any clear connection. However, one thing stood out. They were all last seen in the same general area of Chicago. Police initially suspected these were random attacks, but forensic evidence, limited as it was, suggested the killer was methodical. He stalked his victims, learning their routines before striking. Witnesses reported seeing a dark figure near some of the crime scenes, but descriptions varied wildly, adding to the confusion. Despite media warnings and increased patrols, the killer remained one step ahead. He seemed to adapt to law enforcement tactics, changing his methods just enough to avoid detection. A city in panic, the press dubbed him the Chicago Phantom, a name that only heightened the fear. Women started carrying pepper spray, taking self-defense classes, and changing their routines. Some left the city altogether, too terrified to stay. Even men felt uneasy, realizing that the killer had no clear pattern beyond his choice of victims. Police formed a task force, but resources were stretched thin. Chicago in the late 1970s was a city plagued with crime. And while this case was a priority, it wasn't the only one. The mayor and police chief made public statements urging calm, but behind closed doors, frustration was growing. They had a killer on the loose, and they were no closer to catching him. Then, just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, the murders stopped, suddenly and inexplicably. A deadly silence. For almost a year, there were no new victims. Chicago breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe the killer had been arrested on unrelated charges. Maybe he had died or moved away. Police hoped the nightmare was over. But in early 1979, the murders started again. The first victim of the new spree, a 28-year-old named Karen Wallace, was found in circumstances eerily similar to the earlier cases. The killer had returned, and he was bolder than ever. The FBI joins the hunt. With the return of the killings, the FBI was brought in to assist. Profilers worked to construct a psychological portrait of the killer. They theorized he was highly intelligent, possibly with a job that allowed him to blend into society. He may have had military or medical training, given the precision of the wounds inflicted on his victims. However, no suspects matched all the traits, and those who did had alibis. The killer remained an enigma. The cryptic letters. In mid-1979, the Chicago Tribune received a series of anonymous letters claiming responsibility for the murders. The author taunted police, mocking their inability to catch him. Some details in the letters hadn't been released to the public, lending them credibility. Was the killer getting cocky, or was this a hoax? Detectives analyzed the handwriting, but no matches were found. The letters only deepened the mystery. A suspect emerges. In 1981, a man named Richard Kane, a drifter with a violent past, was arrested on unrelated charges. Some officers believed he fit the profile, but there was no hard evidence linking him to the murders. While Kane was in custody, the killings stopped again. But was it because of him, or was the real killer just lying low? The DNA breakthrough that never came. With advances in forensic science, authorities hoped to use DNA evidence to solve the case. Unfortunately, much of the evidence had been improperly stored or degraded over time. The killer had been careful, leaving behind little forensic material to analyze. Was this a stroke of luck for the killer, or was he deliberately skilled at avoiding detection? Some theorists believe the killer was someone in law enforcement, which would explain how he evaded capture. Others suggest multiple killers, working separately but mimicking each other. Without solid proof, speculation ran wild. The media's role. Public pressure mounted as true crime documentaries and books revisited the case. Some journalists uncovered new details, but nothing led to an arrest. Theories swirled online, but without fresh evidence, the case remained ice cold. Decades later, families of the victims still demand answers. They hold vigils, hoping someone will come forward with new information. But as time passes, hope fades. A possible connection to other cases? Could the Chicago Phantom have struck elsewhere? Some cases in nearby states bear similarities. Was he a traveling predator? Recent re-examinations of the evidence revealed an unidentified fingerprint on one of the victims. Could this be the key to solving the case? Authorities remain tight-lipped. With new technology, some cold case detectives are looking back at old suspects. Could modern forensic techniques finally bring closure? The Chicago Phantom remains a ghost, a chilling figure lost to time. But mysteries have a way of unraveling when you least expect them. Could this case be solved after all these years? Could a single missing clue still be out there waiting to be discovered? What do you think happened to the forgotten monster of Chicago? Share your theories, and let's keep this search for justice alive.